Well, now we're joined from Westminster by the Energy Secretary Ed Davey. And you said in your news conference, that really you couldn't enter any guarantees. Nobody could, given that enormous span. But you have entered one guarantee, and that is the strike price. And the big question, surely, is what happens if the market changes dramatically and falls? Who picks up the difference? It'll be the British taxpayer, won't it?
First of all, it won't be the taxpayer. This is the best deal for the taxpayer ever, frankly, because in the past, taxpayers have picked up the tab.
So it'll be the consumer.
Yes, as I was going to say, when Hinkley Point C starts generating in 10 years' time in 2023, then any cost will touch consumer bills. But we've put in huge protections for the consumer, better than ever before. So, for example, if the wholesale price goes above the strike price, actually the nuclear company will start paying back the consumer. That's a protection that's never happened before. And with the construction risks that we know, we've seen in the past with nuclear power stations being built, where they're over budget and overrun, we've made sure that the consumer is protected again from that, with the construction risks fall on the developer. So this is a very carefully negotiated deal with the consumer upper mind.
But you wouldn't have managed to secure these two contractors if it weren't for the fact that you're putting £10 billion of our money behind it.
I think you're referring to the UK...
Treasury guarantee that goes behind construction.
Yeah, the UK Treasury is providing infrastructure guarantees, not just to energy and electricity investments, but to all infrastructure investments. And there are many that are getting advantage from this in the transport sector and the energy sector. This project is no different. It's not getting any special favours.
That means we are carrying the risk, not the Chinese, not the French, but the British.
No, well, you're mistaking different risks, I'm afraid. The construction risk is completely transferred to the developers, not to the consumer.
If that was the case, we wouldn't need to put any money behind it, and we're going to have to put £10 billion behind it.
John, if you allow me to finish the question, I could answer it. The infrastructure guarantees are about financing, to make sure that people will put the finance in. That's a big difference from the construction risks.
Well, but it's still a risk, and we're carrying it.
Well, it's not a construction risk. That's been the real problem that's dogged nuclear plans in the past, where the construction costs have massively overrun, the timescales have overrun, as we've seen even recently. I was determined to make sure that that didn't happen. Just by the way, as I was determined to make sure that the taxpayer wasn't going to have to fit the bill for the clean-up costs, for decommissioning costs.
But that is exactly where Europe comes in. They're going to be banging on your door and saying, I'm very sorry, we have a Europe-wide commitment not to subsidise, not to put state aid or subsidies behind the building of nuclear power stations.
Well, there's the interesting thing, isn't it? We do have to go through a state aid clearance, not because of subsidy, but because under the articles of the European treaties, if there's government intervention, you have to show that you're not subsidising the way you talk about. We've made very clear that we do not want nuclear to get any public subsidy. We have a no public subsidy policy. We've met that, and we can show we've met that. When my predecessor in October 2010 told the House of Commons that there would be no public subsidy, he made it very clear that that meant nuclear power would get no special favours, and we've delivered that today.
Well, Brussels is going to say this is a most special favour. There won't be a consumer or a taxpayer in Britain that isn't in some way embroiled in some kind of subsidy stroke state aid. Doesn't matter what you want to call it. It's exactly the same. We are in for it. Brussels is going to say no.
John, well, I admire the fact that you know what Brussels are going to say before they've even began to examine it.
It's an act we signed up to.
We've notified the deal today. I think we've got to wait to see what the Commission says. But I have to say, I'm very confident that we'll get state aid clearance, because we'll be able to show that when it comes to low carbon generation, this is a good deal for energy security. It's a good deal for tackling climate change, and above all, it's a good deal for the consumer. I'm very worried about...
Can I just move you on to one other thing? Because here are the two big giant economies in Europe, France and Germany in particular, the most successful economy in Europe. And what are they doing? They are getting rid of nuclear altogether. They're not interested. I mean, the French are not going to build anymore. The French are not going to build anymore. And the Germans are going to pull what they have got.
Well, the Germans aren't going to replace when the nuclear power stations, when they close down. Simply not true that the French are moving out of nuclear power. I don't know where you've got that from.
Well, they're not building any after these. There's been such a crisis in building the two they're trying to build at the moment. they're getting out of it. They're not going to build any more.
Well, I think you're jumping the gun there. They're very big on nuclear in France. And what you actually see, if you talk to other EU member states, which we do, we're in a group of like-minded states on nuclear power, and there are many governments around the European Union table in Central Europe and Eastern Europe who have got plans to build nuclear reactors. So the idea that we're isolated, we're the only ones doing it, simply not true.
This is the politics of desperation, isn't it? In truth, you, as a Liberal Democrat, spoke against building any more nuclear power stations. The Conservatives have preached against getting any state involvement in building these things, and both have had to turn turtle because we've got nowhere else to go, and that's a devastating position to be in.
No, I'm afraid you're completely wrong. You are right to say on this point that I changed my mind, and indeed the Liberal Democrats have changed their policy most recently at Glasgow. And why have we done that? It's because climate change is the biggest threat, I think, to the planet's future. We have to take climate change seriously. We've got to get out of coal in particular. And if we're going to do that and keep the lights on and power for our industry, we've got to look at all low-carbon options. Nuclear is a low-carbon option, and that's the reason I've changed my position. It's also the reason, actually, why this is a very good deal for Britain. We are leading the way in low-carbon electricity and making it affordable too.
Secretary of State, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.